Alright guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So in this one, I wanted to really focus in on the wide receiver position. Right now, it just feels incomplete. We have a guy in Garrett Wilson who is, flat out terrific. But outside of Garrett, we have just a bunch of question marks, right? How good is Malachi Corley? Will the new coaching staff be able to, take his game to a new level? Right? What's going on with Xavier Gibson? Is he going to be ahead of Corley in the depth chart just like last year? We just brought in Josh Reynolds and Tyler Johnson, two guys that I like, but I feel like it's maybe a little irresponsible of a coaching staff to say, okay, these are our two, new acquisitions, and we're expecting 600 to 800 receiving yards from them. Like that, it just feels a little odd. It feels like a little bit too much to ask for at this point in time. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, Allen Lazard. What's going on there? Is he going to be a Jet? Is he not going to be a Jet? I'm going to assume he's probably not going to be a Jet. And again, no sort of report coming out on the matter, but I just have a hard time envisioning him sticking around playing regular season games for the Jets next season. Who knows? Maybe it does happen. But even if Lazard is here, we're asking the question, who really strikes fear? Like puts fear into the minds of defensive coordinators, defensive play callers, right? When you're game planning for the Jets, you're a DC, opposing team, right? Take your pick, whatever. Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots, Buffalo Bills. You're playing the Jets this week. Who are the offensive weapons, right? Who are the players that we need to stop? Well, we know that the Jets will probably want to run the football, establish the run. They have a multitude of backs, young backs with a lot of tread on the tires. Got some young offensive linemen up front. Justin Fields, one of the best running quarterbacks in football. And then as far as the passing game goes, you got Garrett, but that's really the only player I feel like right now that you really have to actually worry about. Like, okay, where's 5? Where is 5 lining up? Left side, right side? Is he in the slot? Is he getting put in pre-snap motion? Where is Garrett Wilson? We need to make sure that we have eyes on him. Whether it's shading, double coverage, that safety help over the top. However defenses want to do it, Garrett will be the prime the prime target from the defensive coordinator's perspective. And again, it just leaves the room feeling incomplete. It would be nice if we had someone else opposite of Garrett to take some of the pressure off of him in the passing game and also maybe take that extra body out of the box. You're taking a look at some of the better offenses around the game, teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Detroit Lions, so forth and so on, right? There's multiple angles that you can attack the defense from. For example, let's just use the Lions because that's where Inkstrand and Aaron Glenn are coming from. One of the reasons why this running game is so good, of course, credit the O-line, credit the running backs, credit the coaches. But when you have a tight end like Sam Laporta and you have receivers like Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, it just makes it so hard to pinpoint what the Lions offense is actually going to do on a play-to-play basis. Yeah, you can watch the film. Yeah, you can, study, how the Lions offense, study each individual formation. What are the tendencies, first, second, third down? Where are they on the field? Quarters, everything, right? But again, when it comes down to it, defense lines up against the offense. It's just tough to predict where the Lions are going to go with the football. Let's take a look at the Eagles, right? You have Jalen Hurts, who's mobile, who could hurt you on the ground. Saquon Barkley, a great offensive line. Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, right? There's multiple ways. Defenses can't just hone in on one player and, call it a day. Minnesota Vikings, Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, Hawkinson, Addison. Going back to the Jets here, I just would not be surprised if we start seeing a lot of, extra men in the box. You kind of can shade that safety over to Garrett's side, and you're essentially saying, hey, can Allen Lazard, can Josh Reynolds beat our corner opposite, on the opposite side of the field, one-on-one? We're going to make Fields go to that read. So I just don't want to see the Jets be so clogged up the middle, right? So congested and all kind of stuck together, right? When there's just so much action happening in the trenches. So it begs the question, are the Jets done adding at wide receiver? Do they have some sort of plan going on behind the scenes? And so I wanted to take a look at available free agent wide receivers, talk about some of the draftable wide receivers, and, really ask you, right, do any of these guys make sense for where the Jets are currently at? Because I feel like there's a couple roadblocks in every single situation. So let's talk about the available free agents. Obviously, nothing really that, in my opinion, there's not an 1,000-yard wide receiver out on the open market. You can talk about maybe a Keenan Allen, maybe an Amari Cooper, someone like that. But I don't necessarily know if that makes the most sense for the Jets. And then also putting myself in the player's shoes, is it realistic that they would choose the Jets over, say, the Chargers or the Ravens or the Bills, like a playoff-ready, double-digit win for sure season? Would an older player be down to come to the Jets where, it might take a little bit for the Jets to really get to the level where they're competing for the division year in and year out? I don't know. In the end of their career here. So if it's not a free agent target, you can look towards the trade market. There's really one impactful name being talked about. It's Brandon Ayuk. Personally, that's just not a road that I feel like is worth traveling down for the Jets at this point. He's owed a lot of money. You're going to have to give up something of pretty high value. I want the Jets to keep their draft picks, not continue to trade picks. And I don't really feel like that's just something that the Jets would be interested in, especially coming after a season-ending injury. And so we look ahead to the NFL draft, and this is obviously the easiest road to travel down here. They're young, they're cheap, you can handpick that player, and you can meet with that player as well. I think the two obvious choices in round one, Terrell McMillan, Matt Golden. Both options I do feel like make sense for the Jets, but is 7 too high? I think most of the time, if you ask the majority of people, the answer is yes. So then it's looking like, okay, could the Jets potentially trade back? If we shoot back to maybe like the mid-teens, early 20s, Shedeur Sanders starts falling, Pittsburgh wants to come up, or, maybe something like that happens. But that's too many moving parts, too many question marks to enter a draft saying that's going to be the for sure plan. If it happens, great. But that should not be the Jets' plan of attack, right? Hope that a team calls to move up, because that's not a sure thing. So then you're like, okay, well, if it's not going to be in round one, maybe we look towards round two. And there are some really, really good options in round two. And it depends on what type of receiver that you want. Do you want maybe the shorter, shiftier, quicker guy, like a Luther Burden? Or, people keep saying that Emeka Ibuka is a lock for round one. I actually see a scenario where he falls to round two. Granted, he would have to get past New England and the Raiders, Jacksonville as well, top of round two. But I think there's a chance that he does fall, not because of his game or his off season or anything. Maybe looking at system fits and how exactly Ibuka would fit into other teams' offensive game plans, and also the teams picking in the top of round two. They have a lot of other needs as well. Like for the Raiders, if they don't go corner round one, they could come back and go corner top of round two and have their choice between a ton of different players. Jacksonville Jaguars, same situation here. But again, Ibuka is a possibility. Luther Burden is a possibility. Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, that's the big one that a lot of, well, I was going to say Jets fans, but fans of every team, I feel like are suggesting Jaden Higgins in round two. Big body, right? If you kind of miss out on McMillan, if that's like if that's the style of wide receiver that you're looking for, and you miss out on McMillan, maybe you come back in round two and target a Higgins because of the size, because of the big play ability, of course, the production back with the Cyclones, but still an option nonetheless. And then you have the interesting option in Trey Harris from Ole Miss, right? Where he has good enough size, he has good enough speed, he has good enough hands, he has good enough quickness, good after the catch, good productivity in the SEC. But does he really excel in one specific area? I still think he should be in consideration for round two, but you kind of feel like Harris is maybe projected bottom round two. But then again, you can push back and say no one really knows what this draft is, how this draft is going to unfold. The grades are very, very, very similar. I think we're going to see, specifically in this draft, a lot of teams draft for need and not necessarily bypass the BPA approach, but if it comes down to a couple players and they're graded out similarly, they're just going to go with the position of need because there's so many players clumped together here. Really, bottom round 1 through the top of round 3, you kind of feel like all these players are very, very similar as far as pro impact. So again, Higgins, Harris, Burden, Igbuka, maybe if he falls. And then outside of that, you could always talk about guys potentially in round 3 or round 4. There are some guys I like. Royals from Utah State. You have Ricky White from UNLV, who I think is a really, really interesting option, who is a former transfer over from Michigan State. So you have some options there, but I feel like once you get into that territory, yes, they'd be, some solid acquisitions, but are those players really, talking about the fear factor level in defensive coordinators, are those, if the Jets draft Ricky White, let's just say on day 3, is a defensive coordinator really going to change his game plan up? I mean, maybe the draft isn't a perfect science. Maybe one of these guys pans out into, a number 1 wide receiver, which would be an awesome surprise, but that's kind of the weird situation that the Jets are in. Not a ton of action in free agency outside of a couple depth moves. We'll see what happens with Allen Lazard. I think really the only way the Jets go wide receiver at this point is if the offensive linemen are off the board in round 1, maybe Tyler Warren's off the board as well, and the Jets just go, hey, we need a pass catcher. We need some juice on the offensive side of the football. Let's just take the best available, again, pass catcher here at 7, or they trade back, which I think would be more likely than them just sticking at 7 and selecting a wide receiver. But then again, who comes up? That's the big question here. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. How big of a concern is wide receiver to you? And look, who knows? Maybe the approach is like Green Bay, where they don't really have that number 1 receiver. Maybe the approach is like Buffalo. They don't have that number 1 guy. It's just kind of spread out. Every week it could be someone new emerging. Like 1 week it's Khalil Shakir, 1 week it's Dalton Kincaid, 1 week it's Keon Coleman, and so forth and so on. So anyway, let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. And as always, go Jets.